So any of you guys who have been following along up to this point and possibly even trying to recreate this code on your own are probably thinking to yourself, well, your code is just as broken as mine. This doesn't do anything. And you're right. And I'm going to go into a little bit of an explanation as to why that is. I figured this would be a good place to start because I think a lot of you guys have gotten to this point with your own code and thought that it was broken when in reality your code was working fine. You just hadn't quite finished with all of the elements that you needed in order to make your code work. But before we get into that, I did notice as I was looking through my code that I do have one mistake in here, and that is that my assignment operator here was a little bit malformed and it wasn't going to do what we expected it to do, so I just need to swap that plus over there so that it's going to do the addition correctly. And now going back into this, we basically have a whole bunch of code in here, which the code is fine, but it's just sitting inside this script tag, which means it runs when the page is loaded and is done, and it never runs again. The problem with that is that it runs before the user even sees anything on the screen, so the user hasn't even had a chance to type anything in here, and so nothing's going to happen with this code. We need to set up a way so that we can run this code after the user has put something into this field. And that's why you guys have noticed that pretty much all of the code that we've been running has been sitting inside of a function. So we're going to go ahead and create a function and wrap all of this code that we've written, except the variable declaration, inside this function. And I'm going to call this function add 40. So this is great. I've got all my code inside of a function now. But if you run the page, if you load the page again, still nothing happens, and that's because you don't have a mechanism in place yet to call this function. So we need this code to run, and we need this code to run when the user asks it to run. And so the element that we have been using up to this point to do that is the button element. And the reason why we use the button element is because it's got this really neat attribute called the onClick attribute, which allows us to specify a JavaScript function that we want to run whenever they click on the button. And so that's why we like to use the button. It comes in real handy. So let's go ahead and add my closing tag, and I'm going to go ahead and just put some simple text in there so our button has text on it and we can do it. And now that I have that, it should work. And what's going to happen is whenever I click this button, the onClick, add 40 is going to run. Oh, I'm going to need to add those on there so it's calling the right function. So whenever I click this button, it's going to grab 20 from the value of this input tag. So it's going to grab the value, which currently has 20, save it into age, right? We're going to add 40 to it, and then we're going to take the inner HTML of this div and replace the DFG with whatever with our in 40 years you will be this. So let's go ahead and see if it works. In 40 years you will be 60. If I type in that I'm 100, it'll say in 40 years you will be 140. So there you have it. We've kind of step by step gone through this code, talked a little bit about the input, the processing, and the output based on the information we've gathered inside of our defining table, and then figured out the different elements that are required in order to glue the input from our HTML into a variable in our JavaScript, and then back out of our variable in our JavaScript into some form of output in our HTML, and then some mechanism on the page that allows us to run that JavaScript whenever the user wants. And I hope that's helped clarify some of the misconceptions or some of the confusion that you guys have been having now as to what all the different pieces of code are doing. And I hope now, if once we've got these concepts in place, that we can focus on the different types of processing from here on out that we can do with our code.